So I'm live. Woo! At least theoretically, I think. Right? There's a thing that says I'm live. Be warned that whenever we did this last time, that it does tend to slow down the computer a lot because streaming and uploading and doing all this other fun, fancy stuff does indeed take a lot out of the computer. So you can hear it like you listen. You hear the glorious sound of the fan just being like, oh God, please save me. So if my computer catches on fire, that's what happened. I would assume Udacity will compensate me somehow. They won't. All right. Groovy. All right. So we've tested out these select statements. And now the next piece of this puzzle is to do a select all from city word name. And we're saying anything before ERDA and anything after that. So we're going to get countries like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, those sorts of countries. Sure enough, we do. And we get Fort Lauderdale out of there as well. That's because it matches ERDA, so Lauderdale. Readability. So like whenever a command gets too long, it starts to overflow on the screen, and then it becomes really difficult. But as far as SQL goes, it's a white space insensitive language, so 1 space, 600 space, it doesn't care. So next, how do we know if there is a number between two ranges? We have a special keyword between. So we're saying select is 10 between 5 and 9. We really hope that the answer to this question is false. No unchecked checkbox, which means yes, that is false. If instead we decide select 7 between 5 and 9 as has 7, we get our checkbox, because yes, 7 is indeed between 5 and 9. Did you write down your question on your?
I'll write it down.
Dear Diary, question 578. All right, now we got a little more interesting one. So we're saying select name population from country where population is not null and the population is less than 1,000. I haven't tested this with PostGres yet, but in certain databases, 0 is considered less than null, is considered null. So whenever you do a statement that says less than, you'll actually get null results in here. But null means I don't know the value. It doesn't mean there is a particular value. So by using this, it's just a safeguard to say, don't give me unknown results. Make sure that you're sticking to the result set that I actually know and understand. So these are the places with less than 1,000 people on it. And like Pitcairn, I don't know where that is. So obviously, I hope no one lives there. The Antarctica, obviously, it's hostile. But apparently, Bovette Island, if you have a lot of millions of dollars and you want a free island, apparently this one's right for the taking. So contact your local real estate agent. We also have certain mathematical operations like float, or pi. So we're going to say select pi to convert it to a float. This right here is a trick some people use, but basically, in most operating systems, if you add an integer plus a float, it'll convert it to a float. With PostGres, it makes you explicitly say what you want something to be. It uses a lot of typecasting. Attempting to use invalid types will usually just give it an error where it says indeterminate type. But if we do that, we see that pi is 3.14, infinitely expanding. Right? This number caused great consternation to the ancients. And that's because the Pythagoreans said that the world and universe is composed of mathematical laws and can be defined by mathematical reason. How then, in a mathematically correct world, do you have an irrational number? Right? They couldn't figure out this problem. So we're now looking at the root of a problem that's plagued people for generations. Same problem that Albert Einstein had with quantum physics. He said God doesn't play dice with the universe because quantum physics says what happens can really be very random instead of nice and orderly. But that's insane. That can't be true, but it turns out it was. And even better than that is Lewis C. Carroll through the working class. He was a very stodgy mathematician, like this. We think of him as like a hippie acid tripper. No, he was a Puritan, like hardcore. And the idea at that time came out with non-Euclidean geometry and also imaginary numbers. And he was like, if you can just make up numbers, imaginary numbers, things have these random things existing in the universe, then you're going to get a Cheshire cat who can talk through an invisible wall. The entire book is to show how absurd non-Euclidean geometry, which is geometry where parallel lines can intersect at some point and other things like that, and imaginary numbers work. And now he's a beloved hippie icon, even though he was actually like one of the most like stodgy old men who ever existed. So yeah, how you go down in history and what you intend to go down in history as may not actually relate very well. And if we just select pi, because it's already typecast as a float, it'll work perfectly fine. We also have mathematical operators, so the power of, take 5 raised to the power of 10 divided by 5, et cetera, until we get to the 10th mark. And whenever we run that, we can see that it equals 1,765,000 or so. For those of you who love your terminal, Mac people only, unless this was added in the bash shell. But there is a library called BC. You can access it by hitting BC-L. -L means load in the mathematical libraries. And it has all sorts of little fun things if you ever just decide for whatever reason that you just want to do a little bit of math on the shell. You can do that. It has power of and divided by. Under the hood, a lot of operating system libraries. Yeah, you can do SQRT, I think is its command. I don't use it that often because I've already told you guys I'm not a mathematician at all. I collect random facts and then spit them out. Right?
So
wow, that's amazingly useless.
How they came about working out pi. It's pretty crazy.
No, they have the same, well, one of the issues they run into is mathematical precision. So like even trying to find out how long a meter is, like right now I think a meter is defined as the speed of light divided by 1,000,000.23. It's this crazy equation because every other constant they've tried using has failed. Because if you use it's actually the room of industrial standards, and it's temperature controlled. And so there is a precise meter in a temperature controlled setting of like, that is a meter, right? And same with a pound, because as you go higher up, you have less gravity, so a pound actually varies. Same with boiling point temperature, right? If you want to boil water at a very high temperature, less gravity means that it's easier for the molecules to escape, so you cannot raise temperatures high. So because of that, you have to cook things longer. You have to be aware of that. So yeah, they have a temperature-controlled thing, but they basically tried to redefine all these things as constants of light or other such measurements that don't vary. And that's a really tricky problem because if you ever do electronics, like in school, you're going to be taught like, oh, it's this precise measurement. Measurement is precise. We actually do the roll, they're like, no, dude, that's like 10 to 20% off. I don't know. The most famous thing, go look at a bag and go look at calories on it. That's a lot. They are allowed legally by the FDA to be off by 20% on any packaged food. So that label is plus or minus 20%. And if you grab fresh fruit, it's a complete toss-up. Depending on time of year, season, size, there's no idea how many calories are in that. That's why some people have a hard time. If you try to count calories, you're wrong. You can't do it. So that's why a lot of the newer diets, yeah, are basically saying like, no, that's, yeah, they're saying like, that's not a good system. And also the numbers are completely wrong anyway. The 2,000 calories, for example, that is wrong. It's actually 2,350 calories. So every person who's male and you divided their average calorie weight, you get 2,350. The FDA said, well, you fatties out there, we're going to cut it down so that way you guys have a reason to be skinnier and you're going to thank us for it later. In fact, no one has thanked them to this date. You can write a letter to the FDA, though, if you do want to thank them for their contribution to your waistline. Yeah. You're going to get a visit from the Reno Police Department.
Yeah. I'll tell you how that's not well. You're expert on buying journeys.
That's right. Legal tip. So we get our laws for the day, right? We got to get all of our subject covered in a short time period. I love the Miranda rights because the Miranda rights state that anything you say can will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford to pay, won't be appointed for you. You understand your rights. Anyone who talks after that point does not understand their rights because it literally says anything you say can and will be used against you. It does not say it will be used for you. Literally nothing you tell a cop can be used in your defense. That is hearsay. So even if you tell the cop and the cop believes you, he cannot testify on your behalf. So the Miranda rights literally tell you, get a lawyer, don't say a word, it's going to be used against you, and people still talk. To me, because clearly there's no way that you can both understand your rights and then keep talking, right? You have made a mistake somewhere. But yes, if you ever find yourself in a legal situation, contact a lawyer. Don't say a word.
You could
Absolutely
say
correct.
spontaneous utterance, and then that's how you get out of it.
Yeah, let me know the good about that.
There are. Even in murder cases, spontaneous utterance.
You have to prove duress usually. So you have to say like I was under some sort of duress. I'm mentally deranged. My son just been killed. I was out of my mind. The judge has to believe that you were under some sort of duress. Same thing if you try to like enforce a contract law. So if we go out to dinner and you get really drunk and I say, hey, I'll make you a bet. I get your house. If I can beat you in math, and you say, yeah. If I try to enforce that contract, it's going to go up to the judge and say, no, that was mental duress. Like, that person was not in the state of mind to be able to commit to that. Or if I threaten your family, something like that. Michael Bay actually tried to make a real film where that happens based on a true story, except he's Michael Bay. So he can't make a real film. It's impossible for him. Stars Mark Wahlberg and The Rock, but basically it was about a group of gym gurus, and that's what they did. They would kidnap rich people and basically torture them and then get them to sell over their assets.
That was good.
That movie was funny.
It should have been called Steroids the Movie, because that's what it was. That is your film criticism, all right? And your legal theory. So now we have select concat underscore WS. This is the one that I said is much more useful, and you'll run it and you'll see why. And that's because underscore WS means with separate. So the first argument to find right there is how do you want to separate out things, right? That's with separate. So I'm saying I want an empty space there. So give me B, empty space 3, empty space, then the current date. So I get B, empty space 3, empty space 2. Right? And it gives you the international version of the date, because America and other countries have always disagreed about things like imperial versus metric and all sorts of other fun things. So this is using the international format. You can see that if I use the second version, which then says I want the separator to be a slash. So now I get B slash, what is that called? Dash. There we go. Slash, dash. But yeah, dash. So dash, B dash 3 dash B. Okay. Then we get into substrings, another way of selecting things. A substring, you also see this in Python. I think they just use substir. I don't know if they make you spell the whole thing out like this. But basically that says start at a particular position and then go into the end. SQL chose to be a one-base numeric index. So every single other programming language chose the zero-based index. And if you want to know, look it up, you can type in XKCD, which is a comic strip you should all become familiar readers of at this point. But you can look up zero-based indexes. Donald Knuth, who is the founder, basically. Donald Knuth, there's a handful of people who didn't actually write any code or wrote very little code, but who are enormously important to computer science. He's one of those guys. He invented almost all the algorithms that these systems use under the hood to make things work. He's the inventor of it. And he has a huge series of books called Algorithms. And Bill Gates said that these are so important and so difficult to understand that if you can master them, he will hire you on the spot. So if you're like, I want to work for Bill Gates, then you can just pick up Donald Knuth's massive collection of books. He's still writing them too, so he keeps updating his algorithms as well. So genius guy, super, super smart people. The rest of us just look at it and weep because the measurement between us and them is just so great. Not much code, but he's influential in that realm. And one of them was the zero-based index, was the idea that computers, the way they understand things, 0 is equal to 1. So therefore, we should use that zero-based position as the first index, which then causes a very common error called off by 1, because in your brain, when you say 12, you mean 12, you don't mean 11. But to a computer, that's how it works. Also happens with some forms of dates. They start at 0 as January instead of 1. So you get all sorts of fun errors. But that's called an off by 1 error. It's one of the most common programming errors out there. Anyway, because SQL uses the one-base index, that's position 1. Position 2 is O, so I get PostGres. Whenever I say select substring of PostGres, position 2 onward. String pos is asking me where in this does the string position exist for a string, which in this case is davidexample.com, and then the @ symbol. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Position 6, and it is. So when you combine those two together, you get a very common sort of selector operation. Yes. Yes, pretty much. But this is, if you're doing this stuff, like, so that's like an ongoing debate of like, should I use the database system or should I use the programming language? 99% of programmers will tell you to use the programming language because it's more verbose to use PostGres for a lot of these sorts of operations. However, what happens when you only have the database, right? You're not going to go write an entire Python file just to go do one query, right? That's kind of insane. So at that point, you have to know how the SQL engine works. Or another common problem is like you write a Python file, you expect a certain result, you don't get it. Well, you have to know how to jump in here and like, okay, where did I mess up at? Otherwise, you're just kind of like floundering around. So you have to kind of know how it works under the hood. But in general, no, you're not going to be doing these sorts of things too often. But when things go wrong, when the world has raised its ire at you, you're going to want to know, like, okay, how do I do this? I really hope this lady isn't here. I'm really hoping she's just not just like, well, they locked me out, so. Yeah. That's what I was also thinking.
Yeah.
I was like, she's going to be real confused because she's going to go upstairs and be like, I don't see anyone.
Hopefully his resistance level is right about it's a feature. It's a new feature. Just throw it.
All right, so my friend in the back over there, if you see a woman with food come parking in, please either flag her down or flag me down to redirect traffic and explain that we like stuff that works and is set up correctly. So that's why we're here today. So no pressure. No pressure. All right, so Postgres. So we're selecting a substring. We're saying, give me it at the string position where inside of this selector, the A is. What I should then get from that is at example.com. For the most part, this would be one of those off by one errors, because generally when you do a selecting like this, you're not going to want that at symbol, right? You're probably just trying to substring out what is your root domain, Gmail, Yahoo, whatever it is. To fix that, you add a +1 after you run the selector. So if you're saying, give me the string position of this, and because it's inclusive and I want to make it exclusive, just add one more line. Now I get example.com. A little bit better. Now, what if I want to know date intervals? This is one of the things that's tricky to do in any programming language. So how do you handle this particular problem? Well, I'm going to say that I want to select the date, and you have to use the date keyword here, because Postgres is strongly typed. So if you don't put date, it's going to say that as a string. It's going to say a string can't be a date unless you say explicitly make a date. So in 1946-05-12, add to that an interval of 5 days, or 5 days, because semantics. Okay, good. So, what should hopefully happen from that, if we look at the date, 1946-05-12, I'm really hoping this gives me the 17th. Otherwise, something incredibly strange has occurred. Sure enough, whenever I run that, it says 1945-05-17, and then it gives me midnight. Because basically the next thing right there is you get the date and then you get the time. And because there's no time specified, it will default automatically to midnight, 000000. Yeah. So that's useful, but a little more useful is what if I want to have it increase both the month and the year? How do I go about doing that? Well, in that case, I select date 1946-02-12, and interval of 5 years and 3 months. So whenever I run that, it is now converted from 1946 to 1951, 05-12. So 3 months were added there, 5 years were added there. You should expect a result. Now, what if I want to convert this date? So I'm getting this typical date format, but for my use of the system, they don't want to see this sort of an internationalized date. They want something slightly more user-friendly. There's a couple of ways to do that. Here it's 2 cars, so I'm saying take this date and convert it to a character set. Give me the date of 1946-02-12. Then give me the day, the month, and then the year is 1946 formatted. So here's a case where I have to use the double quoted strings because there's a space there. Otherwise, this wouldn't work. When I run that, converts that into the first thing, the date. Then I get the month, and then the year, which is transposed over there. I have a formatted date I can show my users. Python has a really nice date library, so you're going to use that more likely, but if you do want to know how to do it in PostGres, that's how you go about it. If you want to know what time it is right now, then you say select now, and it looks at my computer operating system. It says according to your OS, it is 2017 on 7/22, 11 o'clock, 52 minutes, 42 seconds, and then that number of milliseconds. This can cause problems. Why? Well, it doesn't tell me what time zone I'm in, right? So if I have to convert a time, so someone who's in Australia, for example, wants to know what time it is, I would have to know what time zone my operating system is in, then convert that into the Australian time zone. Because of that, you typically see time zone stored in UTC format, which means the Greenwich Mean Time, that time zone. So that way, the conversions are very simple. There's one standard. Otherwise, you have to convert from your standard to some other country standard. And then when you have daylight savings time and other things like that, it gets even more.
And all those things are live now.
They can. Generally, there's a thing called the leap smear. So if you ever want to look it up, Google had to deal with the problem that there isn't exactly 365.25 days in a year. There's actually a smidgen of a second that's left over. And all the internal clocks, when they hit it, were off by 1 second. And it caused several servers to crash and shut down. Yeah, so Google decided that the best way to deal with that was to smear that extra remainder second over the course of the remaining years. So every single second is off by the slightest fraction of a nanosecond in order to smear out the thing. Yeah, that's real. As a computer programmer, you may have to deal with leap smears and other esoteric like problems. Because again, computers have to be perfect. Everything must be correct. So even 1 second off and the world just goes crazy. So if I do the select 2 car now, having dy, then I'm asking for what day of the week it is. That's Saturday. If I say, you know what, I actually want to see that as an uppercase Saturday, then I can use the keyword day right there with the single uppercase, and it says, okay, you must want that version. If I do it all caps, you can probably guess what will happen. And now I get an all caps Saturday, and from that, you should hopefully be able to infer that if I do it all lowercase, I then get a lowercase Saturday. If I want to find out what some random day in the future is, then I say select 2 car date 2020, December of 25th. That day will be a Friday. So, as one Rebecca Black taught us, Friday is an excellent day. Got to get down on Friday. So. She still releases songs, by the way, which I find crazy. Serious, YouTuber. She's on there. They're really terrible covers. She did her most recent one. She did a cover with a guy, and like she can't sing, so she was like, "Ah, I know the secret to this thing. Find an ugly phrase." So she got a guy who sings way worse than her, and so then you're like, you know, you can't sing, but he really can't sing. So I don't know if that's an effective strategy. That's what she wrote. Anyway, so now I want to extract the day from the date of 2020-12-15. And it says that's the 15th. That is the day from that. If I want to extract the month, you can probably guess how that should look. And now I've extracted out the month. Then I run to the problem where I want to convert a date from one format into the other. So I've got my UTC internationalized date. Now I'm saying, no, I want to make that day, month, year using the / in order to get that to work. particular query. And now you can see this convert the 15th to the day, the month, and then the year, which have now been ordered as according to that. Things get particularly tricky if I start wanting to subtract date ranges from each other, which is a typical operation that you're going to have to do. Please. Which is a typical operation that you have to do because you're going to say, okay, the next payment you owe me is in 30 days. How do I know what 30 days is exactly? Well, you're going to have to calculate that somehow. Otherwise, you're going to have to get an email and have to fill in things manually. But you would be surprised how many systems actually run like that. You have to actually send off stuff to a human operator in order for them to do it. But hopefully, we're programmers, so we're lazy. So we want to make sure that as much as possible, we get our operating system to do stuff in the software. We don't want to manually do anything. And generally, as a computer program, if to manually do something, you probably messed up somewhere. You can automate that task. Of course, to counter that is you look up XKCD. They have a thing on automation, and basically it says like your expectation of automation is that like you'll have this huge amount of free time, but instead you spend all your time trying to figure out why your program doesn't work. So the actual benefits of your automation may be overblown. Anyway, so now I want to subtract part of a date, which is the day, from this particular date, which you can either use the date keyword in front or use the colon date format, which it says to convert the string into a date. Minus date part of day from 2020-12-20. That's also going to be a date. That's going to tell it to use the 5 and the 20. It's going to say that is a 5-day difference between 20 and 20. I do the same thing right here. Did I copy and paste the same? Oh, no, I didn't. Ha. Here I'm using the incredibly well-named GUI day of year. So 0 through 364 is GUI, which is a beautiful name. With that saying that in that case, the actual day of the year will be the 339th day of the year. And that's from 2021 to 2020, minus 5 days. Another common thing you have to do that PostGres does not support natively, which is kind of disappointing, MySQL does support this natively, is that you have to get the last day of a month. So here you get into some rather obtuse mathematics. Basically, I can say select, truncate the date of a month, December 25th, add an interval of 1 month minus 1 day, give me that date, and that will be the last day of December, which in 2021, 12/31. The 31 days has December. So some of these statements get kind of obtuse. That's the reason why, to answer your question about SQL, when we use Python versus SQL, it's when you have to write this, right? Python has built-in libraries that do this sort of math under the hood for you, and this is not obvious. So I had to add this as clause to try to explain to it. So I don't think if I just showed someone this query, you would immediately understand what the hell it's trying to do. It looks very obtuse. All right. SQL also supports control flow statements. These are your ifs, your else's, your cases. Unfortunately, it's not as robust as some of the other SQL engines. It only has support for the case statement, which is a lot more verbose than the if statement, if, else. Instead, you got to say case. When one a Boolean, then yea for truth, else true for false if. One is a Boolean. When you typecast it, it's going to be a true value. So in most operating systems, if you have any value that isn't 0 is considered true. This confuses some people because -1 ends up being true. It's not 0. This was invented by Dennis Ritchie in the C language, and everyone else has just carried it forward. There are a handful of languages like Java that make you explicitly state what a Boolean is. And you can see that Postgres follows that sort of thing, where it says, if I just put when 1, it would fail right here. I have to explicitly say, no, that's a Boolean. So 1 as a Boolean is going to be true, so I should get yay for truth. Sure enough, I do get yay for truth. So yay for truth. If I try to test 0, since 0 is a false value, I try to convert that. then I get boo for false. When will you see this at its most heinous? Well, there is a language called JavaScript that really mucks this up pretty bad. So if one alert, yes. You can see right there, one is considered a true key value, so it alerts the yes. If, however, I put a 0 there, the alert didn't get triggered because 0 is considered false. If, however, I enter string 0, I now get yes. Unexpected behavior. If you're going to be typecasting, be consistent. But that's because the way JavaScript looks at that, it says, well, that must be true because there is some value in there. So 0 being false doesn't quite work there. So it still will be yes on a string. So you'll typically see some rather interesting code inside of JavaScript that looks kind of like this. I mucked that one up. There we go. Where I have to explicitly declare the number and then say, okay, take that 0 you gave me back, convert that into a number, and then do your operation. The reason why, when you get responses from the server, all the requests, they're going to come in as strings. Servers don't send out ints and primaries. They always send out strings back as a response. You get back from the server a string, you're asking, is it false? Because that's a string, JavaScript's always going to say, well, that's true. So then you end up getting unexpected results. As we saw before with the betweens, this is another version of that. So case when 15 is greater than 12 and 15 is greater than 12, else logical error. So if this happens, you need to contact the PostGres team immediately. But as we can see, 15 is greater than 12, so the world is fine. All is grand. By the way, you should run these commands along with it. Otherwise, you're just going to scare us.
So if you had one column, and every once in a while it was putting out one value, and some of the time there was another value, you use case statements to separate and count values.
That is correct. Yes, that's a common use case. So you say select case when this value, then count whatever. It'll run through. Each of those cases will be divided up into 2 columns, and you'll have a case of 1 set and then 2 sets. I don't know if you can create a view off of a case statement because that's indeterminate. A view has to be known at the time of running a statement. So I'm not sure on that one. Interesting trial, but I don't think that's going to work. I know, we're counting down seconds. This one isn't going to work for any of you, and I put a comment about why. So for those of us who were here Thursday, we're now on to the new stuff. The way that PostGres works, one of the things that's really brilliant about it is that PostGres has one of the easiest to use new functions of any SQL syntax language. It calls them routines. They're stored in my little folder over here. And there's one in there called ELT. And what Postgres did that's really amazing is it said the P-SQL language, which is the actual procedural SQL language, which allows you to define functions, it's based on C. And since most of you have not ever seen what C looks like, you can tell that it's incredibly readable, right? This is good stuff, right? Very, very obvious what this is going to do. It isn't, right? It's terrible. And basically, this is saying, take whatever is at position 2, look for the index of whatever I pass in 1, and then return that as a select state. That's what it's saying. So it's literally one line of code, but it's already fairly unreadable to anyone who doesn't work in this sort of language all the time. The developer of Python, the creator of Python, and then Home Slice the Ninja, as you referenced, they worked very hard to think about how do I make this English? Because select $2 square bracket $1 semicolon is not English. It's not good semantics. So they spent a lot of time saying, like, how do we make a programming language that tries as much as possible to conform to natural language? Now, it can't ever reach this goal because natural language is ambiguous, right? Ambiguity is all over it. And in fact, if you look at the Supreme Court justice decisions, a lot of what they're ruling on is the ambiguity of even the Constitution. And in fact, all the founding fathers, after they had the meeting for the Constitution ratified the Bill of Rights, they asked them what they thought of it, and they were all disappointed. Every single one of them said, we failed. We failed so hard. We're sorry. It's going to be up to future generations to fix our broken mess. But nowadays, we look at the founding fathers like, oh, this group of super geniuses failed. So, for example, the Senate. Right? Small state said, we want a Senate. Why? Well, if you only have 20 people living in your state, a Senate gives 2 votes to it, so your 20 people get a full vote. You live in Virginia, which at the time was a big state. Well, now you want a House of Representatives because you've got a ton of people in your state, so you'll be able to completely dominate the legislation if you have a House of Representatives. So they argued about it, and they said, okay, fine, we'll go half seats, right? You can have a Senate and half a House. And they thought, oh, that's stupid. That is a terrible idea. Still, though, we're stuck with a House and a Senate. So anyway, the point of that is, of course, programming, right? That was where that was going. Natural flow there. Yes, so ideas that seem good at the time may not be, and then some people may think that your terrible ideas end up being particularly grand. And that's kind of how C is. Like, they had a lot of good ideas, like some really smart ideas, then some bad ones, but everyone learned C, so they just kept copying them forward. So PostGres said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to allow you to choose your operating system or your operating language. We support Perl, we support Python, we support JavaScript. You are able to create a function based upon a language of your choice. That's why you have the specification that says language SQL. You can actually specify language V8, which is the JavaScript V8 engine that Chrome runs on. You can actually write JavaScript functions inside of PostGres. So because of that, PostGres is the most flexible of all of them, because ones like MySQL, for example, this is all you get. And it looks even worse in MySQL than it does here. It's even more verbose and more unreadable. But anyway, we got ALT, it takes an integer, then it takes what's known as variadic, and we get a text with square brackets. In programming, this is called a generic. So if someone talks about generics in programming, you're like, what is a generic? It means I can specify an array of some type. That's a generic. In most programming languages like C++, this looks a little more wonky. And in Java, it looks like what does this look like? This looks like this, and then you say like array, something like that. I'd have to go like look it up, but it has a really funky syntax. Oh, excuse me, it would be something like text or string. It would be in most languages, so it would be string colon. And some of them they use T as a signifier, so it looks really wonky. Fortunately, most of them have smartened up and they said, you know, that's way more readable because most people know that's an array than text. So an array of text, that's generic. So whenever I pass in my things, I have to typecast anything that is in the first position is text. Because I said I'm expecting any form of text, a variable amount of text. So 1, 2, 3, I'm saying select rows at position 2. We learned that SQL is indexed based upon position 1 instead of position 0. So 1, 2, I should get the results of that mathematical operation. I run it. Sure enough, that's exactly what I get selected. And with that, it looks like all of our food is here, so you are now free for lunch. See? No, that's not it. We'll get it in a second. Because I want to make sure that all the days that goes good. We don't need the country rates for this. So yeah, you're good. Yeah, this now. I'm worried I'm fixing my into it. So please don't get to the bottom. Copy as plain text. This is probably one of them. Let's see if the bug is yeah, that was right. Oh, well, actually, this is is that? That's supposed to be. Oh, you have an old version of this. So that's fine. I do know what the bug is. So, that with the class. Yeah. But even that is still gets outdated because I have to go through all this stuff. Make sure that it works, and there's subtle differences between the versions of these things. But program is it's so much choice. Business. There we go. This is what all this stuff works. So now if I run this, that's way down. Otherwise, you're going to be some of this stuff is going to be off. Some of this stuff should. So it's a while before it's so yes, you are now up and running with the same stuff that I have. So you can run these statements, and they will be kosher tomorrow. People watching at home, they can enjoy. I wish there was like a pause of a live broadcast. Instead, I either get the choice of like creating a brand new broadcast or just leaving this here, you know? Yeah, but it'll still break it into two parts. So like you have to like tell people like, oh, this video ended, so now go to the next one. And then I gotta go through the hoops that YouTube put in place in order to make a new video. Shame. All right.